We're really glad you're here this morning. We've been looking at the book of Nehemiah for many weeks, and we reached a point last week where we just kind of paused and we looked at what I thought was the most important lesson that I've ever delivered on prayer. It's not the most important lesson I've ever delivered on prayer. It's the most important lesson I've ever delivered, I think. And what we asked was, when we saw what Nehemiah had prayed over and over again and how God stepped in and allowed them to build this wall around the city, this massive structure in only 52 days, we began to ask this question: do you really believe in prayer? The question wasn't, do you pray? We all have been praying. I've been praying for as long as I can remember in some fashion. But do you really believe in prayer? And I hope you were able, though a lot of people were gone, I hope you were able to maybe listen to that on the internet, on YouTube. And it's one of the beauties about whether you're gone or not here, you can, by the magic of Burke and what he does back there with the YouTube, we can have people watching from a lot of different places. Susan was with a lady this week in another state, and she said, I listened to the lesson on Sunday and talked about the lesson. So, Burke, we're really thankful for what you do here. But one of the reasons why it's difficult sometimes to believe in prayer is because we live in a culture of incremental growth. And we are really happy at times with incremental growth. So we look at last year and we look at this year and we compare last year and this year and we see that this year is a little better than last year and we clap our hands in celebration. We really like incremental growth. And I am not saying anything against it. Incremental growth is exceedingly important. But it's what you and I as people have the ability to do. You and I can achieve incremental growth. And God is a God much greater than that. He wants to look beyond incremental growth. He wants us to show His power. He wants to show His glory by something much greater. And so do you remember that we examined that one verse in Ephesians chapter 3, verse 20, where it says that God can do immeasurably, not incrementally, immeasurably more than we ask or even imagine. Now that verse has really made an impact on me in the last year. Immeasurably. He can do far more than I can conjure up with words or I can even imagine. So what I thought I would do this morning, everything's going to be different this morning, okay? Just everything's going to be simple and different. But what I thought I would do is take you back to the Old Testament and have you look at this king whose name is Hezekiah. Now, he's a really special king because he's one of the rare kings over Judah, the southern kingdom after it's divided, who is a good king. To set it in context, Hezekiah becomes king over Judah over 300 years after the life of David. David is kind of our hero king over Israel. Israel got divided into two parts. And the southern kingdom had bad king after bad king, and once in a while a good king would come forth. And here's Hezekiah, 25 years old. He steps into the rule as king. And in that ability to rule as king, this young man, for some reason, has his heart turned toward God. And he wants to obey God, and he trusts God. It's a remarkable story. In fact, I often call Hezekiah a king of restoration because there's two accounts, one in 2 Kings and one in 2 Chronicles. And while these people have been away from God for so long, they haven't heard anything about God's word. They don't know how to do anything God's way, except a little fragment here, a little fragment there. Hezekiah is the one that comes back and he says, let's restore all this. Let's get out the book of the law that he finds, and let's read about what Moses said. And let's go back and let's look at what David was told to do by God. In particular, he says, let's look at what David was told to do with music by God. and how God commanded David to do certain things with music. And we are familiar with restoration because we go back to the 1800s and we look at our history, our own history here. And we see that a man named Barton Stone and Alexander Campbell, both Presbyterian preachers, said we're tired of all the bickering and fighting. And they came together and they shook hands. And they said, let's go back to the Bible. And let's begin a unity movement. And let's look at things that are important. And on things that we don't quite understand and we can't quite figure out, let's never fight. And thus was born the churches of Christ, the first Christian church, the disciples of Christ. And it grew so very rapidly out of that mentality. That's where Hezekiah is all those years ago. So he wants to bring everybody back to God. If you look only at the 2 Kings account of Hezekiah, all you're going to learn are 3 stories. 3 stories. 2 major, 1 I think kind of minor. But the 2 major stories are stories where Hezekiah is literally facing crushing obstacles. Things over which he has no control. There's no incremental improvement involved in it. This good king who loves God, who wants to bring the people back to God, who wants to get people right with God, who trusts God, has 2 crushing obstacles. I want us to look at the second. And the reason I've chosen the second, and we may go back and look at the first too later, but the reason why I've chosen the second is because it's the one that's so familiar to all of us. It's the one that involves a condition that we talk about every single time we meet. I don't know if I've been to an assembly of any kind in a church building in years and years and years, no matter where, that we don't address this one problem. And the problem is health. The problem is health. Every single time we meet, we address the problem of health. Because there's always somewhere a health problem. Am I right? I mean, I called a cousin in Clinton yesterday. I was wanting some information. I said, can you tell me about your grandson? And she said, this week is a critical week. A young man in his early 30s and a rare form of blood disease, leukemia, and not sure that well, the world would say the odds are not good at all. You know what I told her? I said, you might choose to look up the lesson we talked about from Nehemiah last week and take a look at what God can do. And she said, I will. I know they're on YouTube. Hezekiah's problem, if you read far enough, and we'll not read that far this morning, he's got a boil. And apparently boils were really common in that day and time. Now you might ask, how can a boil get a person as sick as you're going to find that he is? Apparently it's infected. That's all I could surmise from the story. And apparently infection is spread throughout all of his body. And I'm sure being king, wouldn't you think that he has the very best physicians possible? And maybe they don't know what they know today, but he probably has the very best. And I suspect those physicians have treated boil after boil after boil in the life of some person. But you know how that works, don't you? You can treat one person that has this condition, and you can treat another person that has this condition, and you can use the exact same treatment, and one responds and one doesn't. Isn't that amazing? And isn't that perplexing to us? And doesn't it sometimes make us wonder in our prayer life? So here's Hezekiah. That kind of problem. Let's begin in chapter 20 of 2 Kings, verse 1. In those days, Hezekiah became ill. Now, you'll learn later it's a boil, only we'll not get that far. And he was ill at the point of death. This is as serious as it gets. He's at the point of death. And the prophet Isaiah, the one to whom he's been responding, he's been listening. Isaiah will come and talk about how to do things God's way, and he'll restore the people back to God. Isaiah comes again. And Isaiah went to him and he said, this is what the Lord says. You put your house in order because you're going to die. You will not recover. Now, what kind of message is that? And yet there are people, I guess every day in our country, that get that message from some kind of medical professional. You need to take care of business at home because your condition is incurable and you only have a bit of time left. Only that message doesn't come from a physician who does not know entirely. This message comes from whom? It's God. It's God speaking, and God knows exactly you need to get things in order right now, Hezekiah, because you're going to die. You're not going to get over this illness. And so here's what Hezekiah does. He turned his face to the wall. I suspect he was in bed with this illness. And he turned his face to the wall and he prayed to the Lord. Now, before you read his prayer, I want you to know that sometimes we think prayers have to be long and flowing and last and last. Every prayer I read in the Bible, almost every single one that has such giant impact on God is really short and to the point. It's really short to the point. But the ones that God responds to come from people whose heart is turned completely to God, saying, I've got to have your help. I'm in a mess. I have no control. It's out of my hands. If it were in my hands, I could do some incremental improvement. And over the next 2 months, I could get over this condition and the infection would go away. I'd get a little better and a little better. And if it happened that way, we would give ourselves the credit, would we not? Wouldn't we have the tendency, though God can help you in incremental things, He can help you in incremental things. When we do it incrementally, we tend to give ourselves the credit. Hezekiah is not going to get the credit. So he prays. Remember, Lord, how I have walked before you faithfully and with wholehearted devotion have done what is good in your eyes. Now, obviously, entwined in that, he's wanting God to do something. He's on his bed crying. He wept bitterly. I don't want my life to end. I'm trying to get these people back to God. I'm trying to restore this nation back to what you wanted it in the first place. Remember how I've lived. Do something. Now, before I go any further, I want to tell you that there are people who've prayed like that for a variety of things, and they've done it for a long time. Do you remember a woman named Hannah in the Bible? Do you remember that she prayed so intently, and she prayed crying? And she did it over and over and over again. Her problem was that she could have no children, and she wanted a child. And in that day and time, not having a child was a stigma. It was looked down upon. And it was after a long, long, long period of time, God said, you're going to get a child. You're going to get a child. God operates at different times too. But this one, I've got a problem. I'm about to die. And watch what happens. before Isaiah left the middle of the court. He's left the room. He's left where Hezekiah is. But he's leaving the courtyard of the palace. Before he got to the middle of the court, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said, go back. Go back, and you tell Hezekiah, the ruler of my people, this is what the Lord, the God of your father David says. I have heard your prayer. I have seen your tears. I will heal you. That doctor you have over there won't do it, and that doctor you have over there won't do it. I will take care of it. On the third day from now, you will go up to the temple of the Lord. Wow. So sick he's about to die. On the third day, you'll go to the temple? So God responds, I will add 15 years to your life. Now, I've always wondered about that. I'm not going to get into that, but I'm not sure I want to know. I'm not sure I want to know the last year I'm going to live. I don't know what that would mean. I don't know what that'd feel like. But I'm going to add 15 years. That's a good long time. That's a really good long time. Add 15 years to where I am right now. I'm pretty pleased with that. Okay? Would rather have 20. But I'm pretty pleased with that. You got 15 years. And by the way, I will deliver you and this city from the hand of the king of Assyria, and I will defend this city for my sake and for the sake of my servant David. Isn't that interesting? Hezekiah, for my sake, God wants to be glorified. And the reason why I've been so much thinking about this incremental improvement thing, things getting a little better, and a little better, and a little better, is that I can pat myself on the back and I can say, we've done a good job again. And he, for his sake, wants to be praised and glorified and adored. And I'm afraid in our churches for so long, we have patted ourselves on the back for the little bit we've done here and a little bit we've done there. And then we get in a situation like I talked about last week, being blunt with reality. Remember what I said? We don't have any young people to speak of, unless Megan will move. And some of us are getting pretty old. By the way, Arlene's not here, but Arlene left last week, and she said, in effect to me, you don't know old. I'm a whole lot older, but I want you to know one thing. I pray all the time. I pray all the time. And I talked to you last week about my friend in Tulsa at the Parks Church and what has happened there. He said maybe the most mighty part of our church is the people in their 80s and beyond and what they're doing for us in their prayer life and how they pray. And so we don't have young people. We have a vacant house. We have a city that is deteriorating, no new businesses. And we have people all over the city who need to know God, who don't seem to know that they need to know God, and maybe don't even care at this point. And things aren't growing a lot here. In football, we would fire the coach. Okay? In football, we'd fire the coach. So in football, you would fire me. Let's get somebody better who can do incrementally better. Is that really the answer? I mean, whether you fire me or not, I'm going to be okay? But that's not the point of this. That's how we think, and that's how we operate on everything. And here we are with example after example where people in desperate, crushing situations simply said, God, I don't know how to get out of this. I want you to look at this next slide. Next slide. What impossibilities do you face? Do you face? You know, I've got some grandchildren over here that are a bit older than these grandchildren of Greg and Juanita's. They're going to face impossibilities that they don't even know yet. We got some visiting with us on the back row that are children of some really good friends of Susan and mine from over by the Tuttle area. They haven't faced the difficulties yet. Lilac, you haven't faced the difficulties yet. It's not really her name. That's my name for her, okay? But you're going to face impossibilities, and some of you are facing right now what you feel is an impossibility. So can something happen here? I'm going to tell you, not by my strength, not by my ability, and not by yours. You can try every little thing you want to try. It's not going to move us forward much. I don't want to be negative. I'm just telling you the reality. What we have to do is say, God, what do you want? Do you want to close it? Is that what you want? You want to close it? Or do you want to make something different and better that strikes us all as, how did this happen except by God's hand? Because God can do anything.